All right, seventh period. So this is the second segment of your reading homework. The second segment is pages 120 to 130. Just a reminder, you need 4 annotations. Please follow the format that I gave you in your assignment sheet. Page 120. It was getting colder all the time. Work or no work, your fingers felt numb already in these thin mittens, and the cold was coming into Shukov's left boot. He kept stomping it on the floor. He didn't have to bend down to lay the wall anymore, but he had the back-breaking business of bending down for every brick and every scoop of mortar. Hey, you guys, hey, he started badgering the men bringing the bricks and mortar. Can't you get those bricks over here? The captain would have done it gladly, but he didn't have the strength. He wasn't used to this sort of work. Valoshka said, Okay, Ivan Denisovich, whatever you say. Aloshka would never say no. He always did whatever you asked. If only everyone in the world was like that. Shukov would be that way too. If someone asked you, why not help him? They were right on that, these people. From way over on the other side of the compound, it came over loud and clear at the power plant. They could hear them pounding the rail. The signal to knock off. They'd made too much mortar. That's what came of trying too hard. Mortar, mortar, the boss shouted. They just got mixed a lot more, so they'd have to go on laying now. There was no other way. If they didn't empty the mixer, they'd have to smash it up the next morning, because the mortar would be as hard as iron, and they'd never be able to hack it out. Come on, keep at it, fellows, Shukov was shouting. Kilkas didn't like this. He didn't like rush jobs, but he went on for all he was worth. He couldn't do anything else. Pavel came running upstairs with a hod on his back and a trowel in his hand. He wanted to help with the bricklaying too, so there were 5 trowels on the job now. There wasn't much to lay bricks in the tough spots. Shukov always picked out the right brick beforehand. He pushed the gavel out to Aloshka and told him, Here, knock it into shape for me. You can't work well if you're too much in a hurry. Now that the others were going full blast, Shukov slowed down and took a good look at the wall. He went to the main corner on the right and sent Senka over to the left-hand one. If there was any trouble with the corners, they'd lose a lot of time the next morning. Stop! He grabbed a brick from Pablo and laid it himself. Then he saw at the other end that Senka was doing the wrong thing at his corner. He dashed over and straightened things out with a couple of bricks. The captain trudged with another hod. He was as willing as an old cart horse. 2 more to come, he shouted. He could barely stand on his feet anymore, the captain, but he kept going. Shukov had an old horse like that at home once. He took good care of that old horse, but he worked himself to death, and they had skinned the hide off him. The sun was really going down now. They didn't need Kopchik to tell them. They could see all the other gangs had handed in their tools and were crowding over to the guard room. Nobody ever went over right away, and they'd pounded the rail. They weren't crazy enough to stand around there freezing. They put in their shelters, but then after a while the gang bosses would agree among themselves on the right moment for all the gangs to come out together. The prisoners were so pig-headed that otherwise they'd just hang around till midnight waiting for the others. Turin got some sense now. He could see how late they were. The fellow in the tool shed must be cursing him like crazy. Hey, he shouted, don't worry about all that shit. Who cares about it? Get downstairs and empty out that mixer. Take the stuff and put it in that hole over there and cover it over with snow so nobody can see it. And you, Pablo, get a couple of other guys, collect all the tools and turn them in. I'll send the last 3 trowels over with Kopchik. We'll just finish off those hods here. They rushed over and grabbed Shukov's gavel out of his hand and took his string down. Then the hod men and the brick carriers beat it down the ladder. There was nothing more for them to do up here. There were just the 3 bricklayers left, Kilgas, Klavshin, and Shukov. Turin went around and looked at what they'd done. He was pleased. Not bad, eh, for one afternoon's work, and without that fucking hoist, too. Shukov saw Kilgas still had a little mortar left. He was worried about Turin getting hell in the tool shed for not bringing the trowels back on time. Listen, boys, Shukov had a bright idea. You give yours to Kopchik so he can take them over, and I'll finish the job with mine. They don't know I've got it, so they won't have to check it in. Okay, so guys, remember, right? Shukov has hoarded a trowel, so he's going to use the trowel that he's kept hidden to finish the job. That way, the other guys can get the other tools turned in on time and not get in trouble. Okay, let's keep going. The boss laughed. What the hell are we going to do without you when you've served your time? We'll all be crying our hearts out for you. Shukov laughed too and then went on with the job. Kilgas went off with the trowels. Senka started passing bricks to Shukov and put Kilgas's mortar into his hod. Kopchik ran to the tool shed to try and catch up with Pablo, and the rest of the 104 started off for the guard room without the boss. True, the boss's word went a long way, but what the escort guard said was law. If they booked you for being late, you could land in the cooler. There was a great crowd around the guard room. Everyone was there. From the looks of it, the escort had begun counting them. They counted you twice on the way out, once with the gates still shut, so they knew they could open them, and then a second time when you were going through the gates. And if they thought there was something wrong, they did a recount outside. To hell with the mortar. The boss waved his arm. Dump it over the wall and clear out. You better beat it, boss. You're needed over there. And just as a joke, as the boss clumped down the ladder, he said, why do the son of blank gives us such a short working day? You just got about gotten into the job and they pull it off of it. Shukov was on his own with a deaf fellow now. You couldn't talk with him very much, but you didn't have to either. He was smarter than everybody and caught up to everything without having to be told. Slap on the mortar, slap on the bricks, press down and look them over. Mortar, brick, mortar, brick. The boss had said not to worry about the mortar, dump it over the wall and clear out. But Shukov was kind of funny about these things, and he couldn't help it even after 8 years of camp. He still worried about every little thing and about all kinds of work. He couldn't stand seeing things wasted. Mortar, brick, mortar, brick. That does it, Senka shouted. Let's get the hell out of here. He grabbed the hod and went down the ladder, but Shukov, the guards could set the dogs on him, for all he cared now, ran back to have a last look. Not bad. He went up and looked over the wall from left to right. His eye was true as a level. The wall was straight as a die. His hands were still good for something. He ran down the ladder. Senka was already halfway down the rise. Come on, Senka said over his shoulder. You go ahead. I'm coming, Shukov said and waved his hand, and he went back inside. He couldn't leave his trowel just like that. Maybe he wouldn't be going on the job tomorrow, or maybe they'd put the gang on the Socialist Community Development, and they wouldn't be here for another 6 months. He'd never see his trowel again, so he had to stash it away. Both stoves had gone out. It was dark, and he felt sort of scared. He wasn't scared about the dark itself, but because he was here alone, and he'd be missed at the checkout, and the guards might beat him up. All the same, he took a look around till he found a rock in the corner. He rolled it back, put the trowel under it, and covered it up. Now everything was okay. All he had to do was catch up with Senka fast as he could, but Senka had only gone a few yards and was waiting for him. He wasn't the kind to leave you in the lurch. If you were in trouble, he was always there to take the rap with you. The two of them ran off together. Senka was taller than Shukov by half a head, and he had a great big head at that. There are some people with nothing better to do than race around each other around a track just for a sport and of their own free will. How would they like it, the bastards, if they had to do it after a real day's work, without a chance to straighten their backs with their mittens soaked in sweat and their boots worn all thin and in the freezing cold like this? They were panting like hell, but the boss was over there at the guards' room, and he'd think of something to tell them. Now they were almost back with the others, and it frightened them. 100 voices bawled at them. Scum, bastards, mother blank. It's a terrible thing when hundreds of men start shouting at you all at once. What really bothered them was what would take the escort guards to do to them. But it looked like the guards didn't give a damn. Turin was here at the back of the crowd. He told them and taken the blame on himself. The men were still screaming murder. They were screaming so even Senka, deaf as he was, could hear it, and he got so mad he started shouting back. He was a quiet sort of fellow, but now he laced into them. He took his fist, and he looked like he'd go for them. And then the men quieted down, and some of them laughed. Hey, 104, somebody shouted. We thought that guy of yours was deaf. We were only checking up. They all laughed, even the escorts. Line up by fives. They didn't open the gates. They weren't sure everything was all right yet, and they shoved the crowd back. They'd all pushed up to the gate, the dopes, as if they'd gotten them out sooner. Line up by fives. And they started moving forward by fives, a few yards at a time as they were called. Shukov had gotten his breath back now, and he looked up at the sky. The moon had come up full, and it looked all purple, and maybe was on the wane already. It had been much higher up this time the day before. Shukov was glad they'd gotten off so easy, and he poked the captain in the ribs, sort of kidding him. Captain, tell me what it says in those books you've studied about what happens to the old moon when it goes down. What do you mean? Where does it go? You're just ignorant. It's simply you can't see it. Shukov shook his head and laughed. But if you can't see it, how do you know it's there? So you think, the captain just looked at him, so you think we got a brand new moon every month? Well, don't we? If people are born every day, why shouldn't there be a brand new moon every 4 weeks? Come off of it, the captain spat. I've never met such a dumber sailor in my life. Where do you think the old one goes to? Well, that's what I'm asking you, Shukov said, and you could see the gap in his teeth. Well, you tell me. Shukov sighed and said with that funny lisp of his, the old people at home used to say God breaks the old moon up into the stars. What ignorance, the captain said and laughed. Never heard that one before. Do you believe in God then, Shukov? And why not, Shukov said. When he thundered up there in the sky, how can you help believe in him? And why does God do that? Do what? Break the moon up into the stars, the captain said. Don't you see? And Shukov shrugged his shoulders. The stars keep falling down, so you've got to have new ones in their place. Get a move up there, you mother blank, the guards yelled. Line up. They were being counted now. The captain and Shukov were the last in line. The escort guards got worried and looked at the board they were checking off from. Somebody missing. It wasn't the first time, if they could only count. But their count, it was 462, but they had an idea there ought to be 463. They pushed the men back from the gates. They crowded up to them again, and now it started all over. Line up by fives. 1, 2. The worst thing about these recounts was it cut into your time, not theirs, and you still had to walk those 2 miles back to the camp and line up in front of the friskers before they let you in. So everyone from all the sides was in one hell of a hurry to get back and make it inside the camp before anybody else. The first ones inside had a head start. They were first in the mess hall, first to get their packages if they'd have any, first into the kitchen to get the stuff they'd asked to cook in the morning, first to the CES to pick up the letters from home, first to the censors to hand in a letter for mailing, first to the barbers, the medics, and the bathhouse, in fact, first everywhere. And the escorts weren't sorry to see the last of them and hand them over at the camp. It was no fun for them either. They had a lot to do and not much time for themselves. They'd gotten mixed up with the count again. Zhukov thought that they were letting them through by fives. There would be 3 in the last row, but no, it was 2 again. The fellows keeping count went up to the chief of the escort with their boards and talked it over. The chief shouted, "Boss of 104. Turin moved up half a step. "Here. Do you have anybody on the power plant still? Think. No. Use your brains or I'll beat them out. No, I say." But he looked sideways at Pablo. Maybe someone had fallen asleep in the power plant. "Line up by the gangs," the chief of the escort shouted, but they were standing by fives, all mixed up and not by gangs. Now they started shoving into each other and shouting, "Over here, 76, here I am, 13, this way, 32. All right, guys, this ends the second segment of your reading homework. Don't forget, you need 4 annotations to use the format. God bless you.